Hi, in this video I wanted to discuss ego gratification and how it's one of the very internal mechanisms when it comes to the machine and the game that we're playing. And the internal mechanism of ego gratification is that we're obviously trying to create an ego, and the ego is basically something that propels us forward to procreate, to play out the game that we're playing, and the universe and the reality that we're living in based off of the mechanisms judged by external forces created and being in external forces outside of ourselves, like the human sentient being. Obviously, we're part of the whole grand thing. We're a part of the universe, but the external forces created and meant to subject things and movement and things and all sorts of things like that to move out in a certain way. And we're being put off by obviously these standards that happen outside of ourselves. So the ego gratification is one of these mechanisms that moves on from outside of ourselves, and this ego gratification is propelling us. It's something that pushes us. It propels us. It gives us. It pushes us towards some kind of. It pushes us, and it's one of those built-in mechanisms that causes us to procreate, to continue this mechanism that we're part of. And this ego gratification, say, winning a sports event, winning this, doing that, something that propels, doing something, finally saying you got the skydive, or finally saying that you beat this thing, or you went somewhere and you achieved something. At least from your point of view, it's some kind of ego gratifying recognition that makes you feel like you're more justified, that you're more of someone. And this is pretty much to propel the game, no matter what we're doing. It's say the thing that you're doing, obviously it's to make you feel better, and the feel better is obviously a mechanism of pushing this sex and this hunger and all this kind of thing to propel the mechanism to keep turning and keep moving. So no matter whatever you're doing, it's obviously doing something. It has to do with satisfying the push, the desire to procreate and have sex. All these mechanisms are subconsciously, at least speaking, to push us forward, to procreate and move on. And that's even though we're having sex to procreate, and doing all sorts of, we're eating to maintain comfort, not necessarily to survive, but we obviously know that we're not eating. The deprivation, when too great, can be very uncomfortable and create a very strong deficiency and a very strong pain and a very strong suffering. And this thing can obviously cause you to not procreate. It can also cause you not to survive. And this obviously is against the mechanism. That's why usually not eating can be a long and drawn out process and be very painful and very tense. It has a lot of tension. It has a lot of very strong deprivation, suffering, very painful. And that's why it's like eating. The ego and the eating and the sex are mechanisms to get us procreating. When we are having sex, even though we don't realize it, it's a mechanism. The sex, the in out, in out, in out, and the process of momentum and all this kind of thing. This process of momentum is to get us all these mechanisms are mechanisms to this procreation thing, the ego gratification thing. It's to make us feel better about ourselves, to make us feel like, obviously, it's a mechanism to almost in a way weed out the losers, because usually it comes with a sense of dissatisfaction, and ego gratification usually leads to a sense of not moving on. It's almost, if you're not having a satisfied ego, you're not living the life game right, you're not living it happy and satisfied, the alpha male kind of mentality, then you're not going to be procreating. And it's almost a weeding out mechanism, I would say. Sort of like if you don't have food and water, obviously you're too weak you didn't have the ego, or you didn't have the drive to do something. But also we're not playing by those rules anymore, so we're beyond those rules, and we're sort of playing a game. Obviously people are weaker now, and we need more things. We have more autism, we have more diseases and all sorts of things like that, moving us and debilitating us. And obviously that's because these mechanisms of ego and the sex and the natural selection and things like that are no longer a determining factor when it comes to these kinds of mechanisms moving forward the life game that we're playing onto a next generation. At least not in a very reasonable sense when discussing moving on the strongest kind of individual, especially nowadays. I guess that would explain that. And the ego gratification that we're experiencing is nothing more than a self-propelling mechanism It almost drives all the mechanisms that we have. If you have a weak ego, if you're feeling insecure or feeling something, obviously that can be depressing, and obviously that can almost in a way weed you out. It's like a weeding out mechanism. It's to push you out of the procreating game. And obviously it's one of these and it's tied into the eating and obviously getting depressed and losing the will to live. And obviously it has a mechanism built in. If you have no ego, you're not meant to procreate. You have weak genes, and you have all the weak. You're not meant to move on and progress in the mechanism. And it's evolutions or the standards of life's standards of weeding out. But also weeding out is obviously recognition of the game that we're playing and recognizing how we can prevent from having kids, such as contraception and things like that nowadays. So ego gratification, things like sex and all that, subconsciously they're to procreate, and obviously the everything that we're doing is obviously to propel something into the future pointlessly for no good reason, only to impose the same old mechanism in game. No matter how good things get, we're obviously still part of the same mechanism in game. We're still gonna have problems. We're still gonna be satisfying desires and deprivations that we have. No matter how good things get, no matter how few problems we have, we're gonna create our own problems if we need to, in place of that empty space that we obviously don't have. So it's obviously playing the game with problems. The very thing that makes life have any meaning is the problems, and is the very mechanism that makes life almost in a way not worth living because of all the deprivation that you have to go through to make any kind of gratifying experience, at least by most standards, in terms of any reasonable doubt of what life game is. So, so the ego gratification, sex, drive, all that kind of stuff is obviously a part of the procreation and the continuation of the species. And it's all subconsciously is a mechanism trying to control us to continue. And if it's obviously not satisfying us, and if it's not working right, then it's in a way to prevent us, and discourage us from moving on and procreating and doing the same thing over and over again. It's a weeding out mechanism, I would say, and I think it boils it down good enough. The ego gratification, obviously achieving what you want, obviously having some kind of fulfillment, obviously pushes you forward, makes you more appealing based on our own biological mechanism. Based on the whole male-female kind of mechanism that's at work here. Obviously, a person more confident, more ego-gratified, has more of an ego, is obviously going to have more more productive time procreating and moving on to the next generation. Obviously, usually people predisposed to ego gratification and things like this, obviously are going to be more disposed to procreating and bring on a next generation. But obviously we've overcome those standards. There's sperm banks, there's obviously and there's contraception, moving on the species via sperm banks, and obviously hospitals and medication and new medicines or things that are obviously moving us forward. And there's sperm banks that your person doesn't have to get have sex to actually procreate. They can just go to a sperm bank or something like that. So we're obviously overcoming these mechanisms, but it's not necessarily for the good. So ego gratification, subconscious motivating desire mechanism to keep us procreating. It's a weeding out mechanism based on a biological process that keeps us moving and so forth and whatnot. So yes, I think that explains enough. All these mechanisms are subconscious, blah, 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 blah. And I think that explains enough. Anyway, I'm going to say that for the last time in this video. So thank you, and until next time.